the curation in this edition is magnificent, I would say. They really have a theme that they're following, and the blend that they are creating between traditional Islamic art and what, let's say, preconceived notions of a definition of that might mean with contemporary art.
We have 3 tombs in our buildings, which are Khwarizmi warriors who were part of Salah ad-Din's army that liberated Jerusalem. So, I mean...
You couldn't have brought those? Come on.
Yeah, exactly. So...
Welcome to another episode of Hwar AlMadar. My name is Mikey Mhenna. Today, this episode is all about Waqf, which you probably don't know what that means, but today we're going to talk about basically being a custodian for Islamic heritage, for heritage in general, for culture. With me, I have 2 special guests. I have Khalidi here from Palestine, who is the custodian for Waqf of Khalidi Library and Waqf, I should say. We also have Farah Abushullaih, who is the head of the museum at, am I getting this right?
Yes.
Head of museum at Ithra. Welcome to both of you.
Pleasure to be here.
Thanks.
Okay, so let's just start with the biggest, Farah, I'm going to ask you the question.
Sure.
What is a Waqf? Just like, let's start with a really basic question, because a lot of people listening to this will be like, I've seen these, I've heard this term. I know that it's related to Islam for sure. I know it's kind of charity something.
Yes.
Explain what this means.
If we take a moment just to think of the concept of Waqf in Islam, Waqf was, let's say, one of the most innovative resource management systems that we have in our Islamic civilization. What does that mean? The definition of Waqf specifically is it's called the حبس وتسبيل. حبس الأصل وتسبيل المنفعة, which is holding an asset and releasing the benefit of that asset. To take it back, it's a very simple concept. If you have a building, you freeze the asset of that building, and the revenue that you get from operating that building is what you use to sustain the operation of this asset. So, for example, if somebody specifies a Waqf for a hospital and they donate land or a building that is the hospital, so they don't pay rent on that forever. خلاص, it's a frozen asset forever.
Yeah.
And it's not something that can be revoked. It's not something that can be sold. خلاص, it's frozen in time for this specific benefit. And the owners of the Waqf, their responsibility is to make sure that Waqf is continuous, right? It never stops, and the benefit never stops in general. But that's maybe in its very basic terms.
Yeah. So it's like, in English, it would be a trust, essentially.
Exactly.
It's like there's a public, it becomes for the public good, it becomes for the betterment of society, and custodians of that trust are basically empowered to try to maintain that Waqf role in society.
I mean, in addition, the interesting thing is that it's held as an asset in perpetuity.
Okay.
إلى دهر الداهرين
للأبد.
إلى يوم القيامة. So the idea is that you have to ensure the custodianship over time, permanently.
Yeah.
In alignment with the terms of the endowment that was originally made. So the endowie will put certain conditions on the way the Waqf is managed, who should manage it,
the resources, the salaries, payments,
with the revenue. It's the tasbil, you call it.
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, so
but there is a difference between public and private. So a lot of, I think, what Ithra works with is public Waqf.
Amazing.
So mosques, etc. Those sort of institutions. Whereas there's private, family Waqf, which is similarly managed, but and economically, I think it's interesting. What she said is it's an economic before anything else.
Yeah. So let's talk about the institution that you're coming from. So maybe if you can, Raja, introduce this institution that's been around for over 300 years.
Right. So in our case, as I mentioned, the public awqaf are managed by the authorities. In the case of Jerusalem, the public awqaf are managed by the Jordanian public awqaf department. However, Jerusalem is unique or is rare in the sense that the rest of Palestine, you will not find the amount of private awqaf that you find in the old city of Jerusalem. And that, of course, has, maybe I would say obvious historical reasons going back hundreds of years, predating, of course, occupation, etc. So in our case, in the case of many Jerusalem families, I'm not sure what percentage, but the large majority of Jerusalem properties are awqaf dhurri. Dhurri is the family awqaf. So it's dhurriyat X, who are entitled to the benefits, whatever they might be, of this waqf. So in our case, specifically the Khalidi awqaf, there's about 5 or 6 Khalidi awqaf, some of which date to the 1700s, some of which more recent. And this is, in our case, the collection of properties, residential and commercial, in the old city, land, in some tracts of land outside the old city. All of these predate 1900s. We're part of this waqf from the 1800s. And we also, in our case, because that's why we're here, of course, we have a library. And the buildings of the library are waqf, or Muhammad Ali Khalidi waqf. And the collection that we displayed here, parts of or referred to here as well, is a waqf as well. These were donated not by the authors, but by the collectors who had collected them, the Khalidi judges and whatever, court officials who had collected these documents over the years. They were then donated to the library as a waqf.
Can you take us back in time? I mean, early on, we did this walk around, which we'll talk about in a second. But there's this photo of all these gentlemen sitting around a table, signing a bunch of papers, establishing this place. Can you tell us a little bit about the history, the moment, and the intention?
Well, don't forget, this was at the 1900. We're talking about the establishment, the official establishment, 125 years ago. So it's like, as I said, the oldest cultural institution really in Jerusalem. So it was established. This was taking place at the end of the Ottoman, as the Ottoman Empire was starting to crumble, let's say, as nationalism and enlightenment was reaching our part of the world, and Arabism, perhaps this is pre-Arabism, right? This is when Palestinians identified themselves as Muslims and Ottomans, really. Now, at that moment, the family as well, which has been in Jerusalem, we believe, we don't have the evidence, but since Khalid ibn al-Walid came to Jerusalem, hence the Khalidis. But we have a documented presence in the city since the 1400s. And in fact, the buildings that house the library are 14th century Mamluk buildings, part of the Waqf. So I think, with the accumulation of knowledge that these mainly gentlemen, but not only, there are several women involved in the Khalidi Waqf as well. With the accumulation of that knowledge and these treasures, these manuscript written treasures, let's say, they, the political moment was such that the founder of the library, Hajj Raghib, in his proclamation of the establishment, refers to how the world's civilizations were built through libraries, reading, study. So with that sort of spirit, which was very much an Enlightenment type spirit in the late 1800s. So that, I think, was those two sort of processes, what was happening in the context of Jerusalem and this rich family heritage at that moment, burst forth in the form of a library. And
what's actually in the library? I know that you brought
manuscripts. It's all Islamic, 1800 Islamic manuscripts, titles. Some Persian, mainly Arabic, almost all Arabic, plus a collection of. So these manuscripts date from the 1200s, 1300s, I think, to the 1800s, right? And they are a collection, diverse collection of jurisprudence, of course, science, law, a lot of law, because these were all judges and you know, imperial officials whose manuscripts we're talking about. And then there's a book collection, a collection of not rare books, but old books, let's say first printed volumes, 1800s, that some of these gentlemen had collected, you see. Mm-hmm. So, for example, that part of our collection, which is maybe the less valuable in some ways, because probably most of the titles you'll find them in some European library. But the interesting thing is a different angle, which is how they got there and who brought them there. Yeah. So you have a whole shelves of stuff in French, which apparently, which was because one of the founders, or one of the founding team of Khalidi Library was the consul general of the Ottoman Empire in Bordeaux, and wrote about Victor Hugo in Arabic and various other. He was a real polymorph, let's say. He was the first person, I think the first Palestinian or Arab to write about the threat of Zionism in the early 1900s. So, so there's an intellectual history here, which is also our collection is about. We haven't really gotten into that so much as made sure that it's safe.
Yeah. Okay, so safety is actually a really good place to pivot, to talk a little bit about this idea of preservation and cultural legacy. Farah, can you just introduce Ithra as a museum? What is this institution?
Of course. So Ithra is a CSR initiative under Aramco, Saudi Aramco. Saudi Aramco, of course, has been around for a very long time, since the early 30s, let's say. And Aramco in itself was doing a lot of acts of charity around the kingdom to support the development and the evolution of societal aspects in the kingdom, economic aspects in the kingdom. Part of its mission is, again, to benefit the community in different ways, and Ithra stemmed from that concept. We're not established as a waqf per se, but we like to think that we operate as a waqf in certain areas, especially in the museum, for example. So Ithra is a wide cultural institution that has different components that all reflect world culture, let's say. We have a library, a museum, a theater, a cinema, and a knowledge and learning building that focuses on lifelong learning, let's say, for different audiences in different ages. But what we do in the museum, we collect. So that in itself is an act of, let's say, collecting for the benefit of the community in perpetuity. And it's something that we want to last for a very long time. As a non-profit, we try to impact the community in different ways. Islamic art is a big arm of what we do in the museum. And it's something that we've been building on for the past 10 years, I would say. Yeah. Collecting in different areas. And this is one of the, let's say, proof points of the impact of having a collection that is revolved around Islamic art, which is participating in biennales such as this one.
Yeah. We talked, can you give us a sense of the extent or the scope of what you guys are trying to do? And when you talk about the audience, who is the audience? Who's the audience for Ithra, and how is that different than the audience for the Biennale?
There's a lot of common ground, definitely. And as Ithra, we have a target of, let's say, impacting the entire community, the entire mass public, okay? And then through different programming, we specify different target audiences. Youth is a big part of our mission, and impacting youth is a big driver of what we do and how we program things. But at the end of the day, we create programming across all of the various components that we have. On a yearly, daily basis, we have events, programs, engagements that all speak towards that. Part of what the Islamic Art Biennale is trying to do, and is succeeding in doing, mashallah, is showcasing the richness and diversity that we have within the region in terms of our history, our content, what stories do we have to tell, and bringing that into light. Yani. They're working with institutions from all around the world. This is something that Ithra does yani, as well, to make sure that different perspectives are taken into consideration. And that's why at the end of the day, we are called a Center for World Culture. So we really try to take that into consideration with what we do.
This is the second time you guys have participated in the Bidande.
Yes.
Is there anything different about this time versus the last time?
Let's see. The last time was the inaugural version, so that always has a special, let's say, place when it comes to creating such impactful initiatives. It was a beautiful thing to see happen from the government, from the Diraya Biennale Foundation. And, yani, mashallah alayhum, from the first time, I think the amount of interest that they had in terms of engaging the community, but also different institutions around the world was great. So you had a lot of representation. Now in its second edition, I really believe that it's finding its voice, and it's the curation in this edition is magnificent, I would say. Yani. Yeah. They really have a theme that they're following, and the blend that they are creating between traditional Islamic art and what, let's say, preconceived notions of a definition of that might mean with contemporary art, and blending it together to try to create a sort of continuation towards this Islamic art label. Yani.
Yeah. Raja, this is the first time the Khalidi Library is participating. I'm curious, for you, when you were approached to participate, did you think of yourself as like, well, we don't do Islamic art? What do you guys talk? Yeah, so
we're not an art institution.
So how did you feel about being asked to be a part of it, and now as you're here and you're reflecting on the stuff that is here, do you actually see the role that you're playing as being more apropos?
I think the motivations, we responded to what we understood to be the motivations of curators, which is that they wanted something from Palestine that stood out. Right? And I think they wanted something that obviously was, cultural and related to art and in the broad sense, but needn't be artistic as such. So that's when they when they reached out. Yes, we were not only surprised, but we were, in fact, I would say, skeptical, because, and then even when the themes were first put to us, art of numbers, and Waqf, I'm not sure at what point it entered the discussion, but that was the earliest conception that we understood was art of numbers. And we were trying to think of it, and then we came up with this idea that, yes, of course, the Waqf is all about shares and very carefully calculated shares, depending on Islamic law as well as on genealogical, right? So that was, there seemed to be a reason, a credible, sort of a substantive reason for us to participate. On the other hand, then there was the issue of what we didn't have any objects, really. What are our objects? Our objects are, and there was this, I think really the one exception, insistence that no, you participate with objects. And they spent a bit of time saying, look, the Vatican is sending us objects. The Louvre is sending, can't you send us this so-and-so? There was a discussion about a very specific manuscript. And, no. So back to safety, in our case, we cannot move our objects. So that was, it was it took a little bit of back and forth and convincing us, then, the curators explaining what they were aiming for and making compromises, let's say, and us understanding better not only how much of an opportunity this could be because of the networking, exposure, the prestige for our own constituency, etc., but maybe it's part of what you have to, the identity of an institution like ours. I said we're the oldest cultural institution because the written heritage is part of culture, but we're not, in the sense of Ithra, a cultural institution, a functional,
public-facing,
community-based organization. We are a library intended for the public, but we don't overinterpret that. So so the understanding, therefore, was that the best way to respond to Madar's sort of curatorial themes was through the way that we did, which is namely tell the story of the library and the people and the place to the extent possible, and the content, of course, and display what could be displayed in forms of replicas and digital images.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and I think in the end it fits fits really well. It doesn't, there's no jarring sort of, you move from yours to ours or wherever. There's no jarring sort of disconnect. On the contrary, I think it definitely adds. I mean, how can you talk about Islamic culture without having Jerusalem there? Sarah.
Yeah. So I think, that's part of the thing. Part of the thing is representing, from my perspective, as I'm not part of the curatorial team, obviously, but from my perspective, it's about Islam and about where Islamic arts are, whether they're in Timbuktu or whether they're in Andalusia or whether they're in Jeddah or if they're in Jerusalem. And part of that idea is like, no, we need to actually represent where the Islamic arts are and where Islam is. And so I think it is actually really, really powerful to say, no, this actually needs to be represented as a perspective. Even if they are replicas, even if they are just
true, because otherwise nobody would have known that that library has existed since the 1900s.
Yeah, and I count myself in that nobody. I didn't know that, right? Yeah. So I didn't know that this library existed, and furthermore, I didn't know that the history associated with that library existed.
Yeah, and it's such a rich history that you need to present.
Yeah,
definitely.
And the story of why they are digital, I think in many ways is as powerful as
why they have become the. You mean
why there are only photos as opposed to the books themselves?
That's why they exhibit.
Yeah. I mean, that's a powerful story as well, and it's one that is like, if we're talking about preservation of Islamic arts and culture and celebration of them and investigation of them, we have to look at all the other ways they're being.
Well, we're one of the few ones of the 35, I guess, institutions where the idea of preservation is not only the ones that you refer to, but but this very specific critical one of a specific threat that we face. So that tends to take precedence in our in the way that we, rather than defogging, what do they call it, fogging and defumigation, which we also do, but I mean our real worry is not that.
Farah, I want to talk a little bit about, earlier we were sitting around and we were talking about how cute it is to see all the students walking through.
Amazing.
It's super nice.
Yeah.
And Ithra has a really big engagement with schools.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that idea of like, get them while they're young and try to expose
definitely
the role that you guys play in that, but also the role that you see the Biennale playing in trying to expose kids to this different way of thinking about art and different way of thinking about Islamic arts?
I'll sort of tie it back to myself maybe. When I was a student at school, we did have school trips, but none of them were really focused in terms of like any learning in a creative environment. Okay. As Aramco, I remember we used to go to the oil exhibit where we used to learn about oil exploration and how it happens, and that was the most fascinating thing that I had ever seen.
Science museum.
Exactly. It was incredible. The first traveling exhibition that we maybe have had in the Kingdom, Aslan.
Seeing the thing that puts the pipe in the pipe and the thing that.
Yeah. And Aslan, what does it look like? What does this oil look like? That was the first time I actually experienced that. Growing up, maybe that was the most learning-based trip that we've had. But thinking about it, we didn't really learn anything on our trips. So just to see how, like you said, get them while they're young, because once you trigger that curiosity in them at a young age, there's no telling where that thinking will lead and where it will go. Just thinking about, again, myself, I only started learning about this after I graduated from my bachelor's, not even before that, not even high school. يعني if I had يعني if my curiosity had been triggered earlier من الابتدائي مثلا or المتوسط أو الثانوي, I think I would have led a very different يعني method of my own career development, my own personal development. Again, the youth, we want them to be interested because this is the future of the kingdom. They are the future of the kingdom. Who will be the custodians that will be taking care of Ithra in the future, you know? That's why from now we want to make sure that they realize the importance of creating such, يعني, not just programs, but يعني, art in itself as a concept. What does that mean and how can it impact your life? Is something that يعني, we have a children's museum that does not exist in Saudi Arabia. This is the first children's museum that is targeted for ages 0 to 12, where they are learning about Islamic art. Yeah. So yani, that in itself just shows you that we want to instill this in them at every stage of their life. And that's why Ithra has programming that touches people in every stage of their life.
Yeah. When you talk about library, are there visitors? I mean, are there people who come and like look at old manuscripts from 300 years ago? Legal manuscripts?
Well, that's the way it began, no longer. No. It was, in fact, yeah. And again, back to the Waqf angle, the first librarian, and for many years, was his stipend, was the share of the founder of the library, Hajj Raghib's mother, my great-grandmother. Her share in the operation of another Waqf, Hammam al-Ain, that we talked about yesterday, was mawquf, was turned into a Waqf in itself to cover the salary of the librarian.
Okay, who was the librarian? Do you remember the name?
Bal, his name was at the time. He was a scholar. So this was probably through the first 20 or so years, I'm not sure how long, he stayed in place. The point is that then you had judges and scholars and coming by, and literally, yes, we have, you know, the original library rules, you know, including no argili seriously. So there, you know, it shows you that it was a living.
It's still a good rule to have, by the way.
Well, in a library, yeah, you would assume. But now, you know, after 48, there was a big shock because Jerusalem was divided. Many Khalidis left. The Mutawalli of the time moved, well, the founder, who was still Mutawalli in 48, he died soon after. Some Khalidis were in Jordan, some were in Palestine, some were in Lebanon. And the library was effectively, I think, you know, no longer able to serve its purpose for probably until 15 years ago, 10, 12 years ago. So for most of the period under occupation, after 67, it was closed under lock and key, but no activities, no visitors, no scholars. Nobody knew even what was in the catalog. We had an old catalog, but no, it was never researched until.
Wow.
The collection was not properly researched until the early 1990s, when the Furqan Foundation. I met for the first time yesterday Sarah Ahmed Zaki Yamani, and she's you know, her family, her foundation was instrumental in publishing the very first, you know, scientific catalog of the whole collection.
Wow.
Which Khadir Sanami,
amazing,
our current librarian, was part of. So there was this renewal, basically, from the 1990s only, which permitted not only a renovation of the site, of the buildings, and an expansion into another part of the Waqf, which became the annex and the offices, but it allowed for the beginning of a skeleton program, let's say. So at the time, in the 90s, we sent 100 manuscripts, something we would never do today, to Wellcome Foundation, I believe, in the UK, for conservation and restoration, the most valuable. And then brought them back and put them back under lock and key. Anyhow, so it only became a public institution again in the last 10, 12 years, under new Mutawalli management, myself and two other co-Mutawallis. So we have an interesting, there's issues there as well on how you manage it. In the case of the public Awqaf, it's not an issue, but in the case of the private Awqaf, they're always fighting, and you always have one member of the family contesting that this current manager is incompetent, should be removed.
That's like a rock band.
It's you cannot just it's not because so and so was mutawalli, his son becomes mutawalli. No, there's al-arshad. There are very specific conditions in Islamic law about who is allowed to be a custodian. And so and discovering I've only learned all of this in the last really 20 years. Increasingly in the last 10, but there have been we've discovered in the family archives back into the early 1900s, there was somebody trying to remove that mutawalli, and the court either he removed him or didn't. And then every 30 years there's somebody challenging the leadership, which is good. It's healthy. It shows that it's not some sort of monolithic thing. So anyhow, since we the three of us assumed. And we have this Friends of the Khalidi Library in the United States, a charity, non-profit, which funded all of this startup back in the 90s, or mobilized funding especially, from a huge variety of Arab and international sources and family members. And it allowed us to decide, how do you become a public institution when you're how do you restore the service of being a public library with content that how many people in the world today want to consult that stuff? It turns out
a lot.
It turns out that there's quite a few.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Literally, we get emails every week from people who say, "Can you send me this manuscript? Can you send me that man? Do you have this? Do you have that?"
Yeah.
So there is definitely a demand.
Yeah.
But in terms of actually looking physically, that's finished. We have brought the library into the 21st century in that sense. Namely that we have the whole collection is digitized. It's online via our website, but hosted by a Hill Museum and Manuscript Library in the United States, who did the digitization and who safely host one part of the collection. We have another digital collection. The point is that nobody now is allowed to consult the manuscripts unless it's somebody very important who wants to see the real thing. You know what I mean? And we make sure that the ones we have, that the 1,800 manuscripts are properly stored. We're restoring some, but we have very limited, manuscript rest. We have a small team, but very limited capacity. But that sort of thing is, there's collecting is one thing. We don't collect anymore, for example, but conserving is one thing. But then there's the issue of what else is a library supposed to be at? So we have gone some direction in trying to redefine the mission of being a public library in today's Jerusalem.
Yeah.
One of that part of that is just to have a space that people could come and see. So people come in, not only tourists often, but community members, students, school students, and they're always amazed to see not only the buildings, but we've set up an exhibit, less perhaps elegant but bigger in some ways than the one here. But what I mean is that it has replicas, it has a timeline and stories of the people. It has, it gives you the feel of, and so it's an educational tool that we decided we need to play that role at least, and circumstances permitting, which are in the current circumstances rare, but public events and lectures and that sort of thing. That's the best we can do. That's all that the Waqf requires of us. I mean, we cannot assume a role that is not intended for us. There's other people to do other stuff.
It does underscore the idea of perpetuity, though.
It's an issue, the perpetuity.
Even it's funny because at the beginning when I was introducing this, you were like, "It's in perpetuity," and I saw the intensity in your eyes when you said that.
You can't get it off your shoulders.
Which it means like, okay, even if it closes, even if we close for a while, at some point we need to figure out a way to open this. Like, this is supposed to be for the public good. This is thankless, but we're supposed to do this, right? We're supposed to actually figure out.
300 years ago, somebody decided that one of us at this 300 years down has to be around to take care of it.
Maybe just not a thankless job, because at the end of the day, they're doing it out of the initial, let's say, intention of waqf is out of love for God, your relationship with
Absolutely.
God, and that is the main driver of awqaf in general. Because, like you said, you meet people who maybe are not interested, who don't feel the weight of the responsibility, who have different very subjective ideas about that waqf. بس خلاص just the fact that someone at some point took a stand to make this deal forever means that you're looking way beyond yourself and the community, and it's completely related to the divine, so you can be able to move forward with it.
And you end up having a respect for these people who you obviously don't know. Sun'Allah Khalidi, I don't know who Muhammad Sun'Allah is, but I know that his descendants are 130 of them today living, who I have to give one out of whatever thousandth share of the income of this property.
And you have to write all of it down and keep a record of everything.
Write all of it down, and you have to update the tree every time somebody passes away. Of course, the hisb changes because the shares are both gender-based, according to Islamic law, but also generational. So the interesting thing about a waqf dirri is that, I'm talking about the income from the awqaf that are rented. So we rent out these 40 properties, right? The income is divided by the share that each of these 130 people have in the total income, right? Now, the interesting thing is that the younger generations, or the income will be distributed in any one point of time, say around 3 generations, because you'll have 3 different generations, members of 3 different generations still living. Point is that the eldest, so it's a form of social security. The biggest share in the whole waqf is the older, last surviving member of her or his tabaqa, generation. Generation. I'm number 11 from Allah. People who are still alive who are in number 9 are getting like 7 times the share that I get. So it's a form of what I'm saying. It turns out it's a form of old age pension.
Seniority. Yeah. I want to go back to this idea of sort of like the divine obligation. How do you think that plays into the work that you do?
As Muslims, I hope it plays into everyone, and everyone's role in what they do in their job, in their with their families, with their lives. It's the guiding force, right? At the end of the day, it makes you humble in your actions. It makes you not seek, let's say, gratification in shallow ways. It makes you seek gratification on a bigger level. Always keeping in mind the big picture of what's going on is important, just to not, get distracted unnecessarily, because there's so many distractions around you. And at the end of the day, as Ithra specifically, what we're doing is for the public. What we get in return is a very, very small fraction of what we spend, we're not doing it for the money at the end of the day. We do it for the benefit of the people, the impact, the growth that we want to see, and let's say impacting also the intellectual side of things, so that people can again, make their own decisions when it comes to divine things that are for the greater good, not just for the specific good of specific people.
Yeah. When you come to an exhibition like this, AlMadar, if you were speaking to the folks who are curating it and working with it, how do you think they should think about the success of this type of exhibition? As somebody who runs a museum, right? If they came to you and said, Farah, we're trying to decide if this was a success or not. How should they think about success?
Is it institutional success or is it personal success? Institutional success, you have KPIs, right? What are your key performance indicators? When you were deciding on creating a biennale and you decide on setting a specific budget to spend on this biennale, what is the return that you expect to make it make sense, right? Is it the number of visitors? Is it the impressions that you get online? Is it the content that's been created from programs that are related to this? There's certain metrics that lead to us being able to definitively say whether it's a success or not. بس يعني
It's like
again,
you zoom out a little bit.
Exactly.
What is the legacy, like beyond the KPI? How do you think about legacy?
It's the impact. It's like how does the community see Ithra? Who was Ithra to our community? Ithra, we want it to be like a character that grows up with you, right? It's your second home at the end of the day. So just creating a safe space for people to be able to come and sit and talk. Maybe they see an exhibit, maybe they go to the library, but at the end of the day, they're there in that space because that is a space that they feel comfortable in. That is impact that we have. Yani, and alhamdulillah, with Ithra, we have the numbers to prove it. On a yearly basis, we get about 1.2 million visitors. The museum in itself, I think around 200,000 visitors a year. The library is one of our most visited components in the center.
Modern text.
Filled with students. Yani. We have
It's a modern library. It's a library of modern.
More بس modern. We have also rare books. We have a small collection of rare books. But يعني, it spans different timelines and different fields. But that in itself, I think, when you go and you see the libraries filled with students during exam times, for example, and you change the operational hours to be able to accommodate for those students who want to come in at 2 a.m., then you know you're impacting people.
Yeah.
It's a humbling experience.
Okay. Before we wrap up, I want to talk about some of the objects you guys have brought. Earlier on, we walked around and saw AlMadar, so we're going to play a little bit of that now, and then we'll come back.
What you see here is the collection from Ithra, the Islamic Art collection. About 6 pieces are shown here that all go back to the research and let's say resources we gathered for an exhibition that was held in Ithra in 2023. So the exhibition at Ithra ended in place, and it was called the Shop and Masjid. And we looked into the mosque from different angles, the evolution, the function, and aesthetics of the mosque. And what you see there is the collection that all relates to the theme of Waqf as direct Islamic Art, but also tied directly to the function of the mosque and the operating and maintaining. This is the
Farah.
And this firm in detail, in very and specific detail, the appointment of Bashir Arra to be basically the manager of all endowments related to the Prophet's Mosque. And so this comes from Turkey, and Bashir Arra was, how can I say, he was an Ethiopian castrated man who moved up within the Ottoman Empire until he reached a stage of trust within his community, and he was bestowed one of the greatest honors that a person can ever know, which is to take care of the waqfs related to the prophets of Muhammad. In these 6 lines, this is all written in Khat al-Diwani. It details what the responsibilities are, but also it details some of the, let's say, payments that need to go to different jobs within the mosque. So light keepers, how much would you pay them on a monthly basis?
It's very low.
Not just light keepers, maintenance, teachers, the imam. This level of detail is something that Waqf was very famous for recording in detail and specifics, so that it is accounted for each and every Waqf that they correct.
How cool.
This is talking about,
I love that.
the Mishkat, which is the light of the mosque. And it's also, and it ties back to the, let's say, a job of maintaining and operating Waqfs, because blood such as this that were played on would be then bestowed to the mosque as a Waqf. A good example of this is this tafsir book.
Let's check this one out.
This tafsir book, it has a very difficult name to remember, but it's a beautiful name. المحرر الوجيز في تفسير الكتاب العزيز. And it came from Andalus. And this was shortly after the original book was written in Spain.
And then put it for me, you.
That's cool.
How cool.
In this page, what is being discussed here is the tafsir ayah min Surah Al-Shura, which basically talks about the importance of community within Islam and the importance of sharing the benefits of what we have with our community. So this all came even before Zakat and Waqf were officially established in Islam. behind you, we have a beautiful mausoleum that is inscribed with the ayah in Surah Al-Nur. It's related
to light.
life keepers and the importance of life keepers within the community of Islam. They would be there in Fajr, they would be there when the sun sets to make sure that people are comfortable in the space. And this is something that could not be left to chance, right? So you needed to have someone there to make sure that it happens every single day on time. But this is a very unique minbar. This minbar, and it goes back to the 18th century. And as you can see, it has 3 steps.
Yeah.
The motifs and the designs that you see are resembling those of very diverse, let's say, backgrounds and cultures. So you can see motifs that come from certain areas all together. And just the fact, I don't think you can see this structure. This minbar has wheels. Probably used for ease of moving the minbar in terms of having a space that may be used for different things. Beautiful minbar from Morocco, من جبال الأطلس.
Amazing.
Sure, have a very rich history.
So this part, which sort of tells the story of how the manuscripts that are in the collection were brought together over several generations from these 1600s, basically, until the late early 1800s, and the various generations of Khalidis, judges, politicians, diplomats, and these were brought together in 1900 by this gentleman, my grandfather, who brought together papers that this gentleman here, who was the Ottoman consul in Bordeaux, and this other older Hamad Ali, etc., he brought them together in this building up there. You see where it is. They put, this Hajra established the library, in 1900, and it's now the oldest cultural institution probably in Palestine, still going. And it was established as a private collection, or a collection of privately owned manuscripts, which were brought together in a waqf. So Waqf al-Khalidi is basically a collection of around 1,800 titles that were, as I said, cover a range of topics, but some, the oldest of which, I don't know, we didn't include Salah ad-Din in the end, yeah. So anyhow, the oldest of which is like 1300s and is a sort of a chronicle of the Battle of Hittin, kind of tribute to Salah ad-Din. And then others, the Quran, Tafasir, a book about a medical text, other sort of, these are the examples that we decided to share. And as I said, these were all brought together by, if you see in the background, there's a picture of the establishment of the library in 1900. So there's local clerks, judges, and scholars, but also Jazairi came from Damascus, and it was a regional event almost.
Amazing. So, Farah, of the objects that you showed us in AlMadar, is there any one of them that sort of the story behind them really sticks with you? You're like, I can't get over this piece.
I think the beauty of our pieces that we're showing here is that each and every one of them is presented with its context. We're not just showing you works that are aesthetically pleasing or just telling you the date of this artifact, for example. No, we're telling you specifically how this thing functioned and what purpose it served. So our collection is all tied to the mosque and the waqf that is related to basically, it was an endowment for appointing Bashir Agha to take care and manage all of the waqf, let's say, elements that have to do with the Prophet's mosque. So this was a huge responsibility, and this is one of the things that I want to mention as a story that is very impactful, because you see Bashir Agha was a castrated Ethiopian slave that was working under the Ottoman Empire. And within his own, let's say, means, he was able to move in between the Ottoman courts and gained a level of trust and loyalty that they appointed him as the manager of the Waqf, of one of the largest awqaf that exists. And he went from being someone who was disregarded to someone who was maybe the third most powerful man to rule at that time. Wow. After the ruling empire. And this is something that shows how Waqf, how inclusive it was, number one, how it was completely tied to charity and not prestige or power, because those, let's say, positions could have been held to other people with power, right? But no, the human aspect of it and showing how your intentions will lead you to benefit and power eventually. This is a great story that speaks to that.
Where is that object from?
Turkey.
From Turkey.
Yes, the firman is from Turkey.
The firman.
Yeah.
Amazing. Before we get to your objects, I was curious, like as we were walking around, you're like kneeling down, focus on the objects. Did any of them leave a specific impression on you?
Of those?
Yeah, of those.
Yeah, I like to know the details.
Yeah, of course.
So, and if somebody's تعبوا حالهم.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. So I like to know what it is I'm looking at. No, I think, I love the prayer rug. I thought that was beautiful, both visually and it's the story behind it and the different, and the minbar, which is, I didn't understand. I'll look at it again later, but said something about each step, having a different design motif.
It was when you look at it all together, there were different motifs that were incorporated that speak to different cultures.
Yeah.
It showed the diversity of the craftsperson, let's say, that was designing.
So I think that I just like to know the details.
Yeah. Do you have any?
And the period is very. For me, it's interesting. Not just wow, that's so old, but wow, that was 1,000 years ago. They were thinking about that or whatever.
Yeah.
Layers.
Earlier on, when we were chatting, you sort of like jokingly said, "Mikey, I don't know anything about Islamic arts. I don't know anything about this stuff." But hearing you talk about this stuff clearly. Within a broadened definition of what Islamic arts are, you do.
If you want to define Islamic arts to include the written word, sure. I mean, in fact, our original idea was to
What is Islamic art?
Well, you tell me. I mean, but the original idea was, my understanding was, I thought originally of calligraphy, which we could have looked at, but anyhow. So, I mean, otherwise, I don't see what we, our collection as an art collection but it doesn't matter. This is all semantics, really. I mean,
it is semantics, but I'm curious because as you're walking through AlMadar, or as you're being here, are you enjoying that broadened definition? Are you saying, oh, okay, cool, like, okay,
we fit in a much broader definition?
Not only do you,
yes, definitely.
Not only do you fit in a broader definition, so do a lot of the other institutions and objects.
Well, that's what I understand. No, but the other institutions and objects, the 5 or 6, that is Islamic artistic.
I want to just say something about that. I don't, in terms of the label of Islamic art, it's history is complex, okay, and the term of how it came to be Islamic art, the history is complex. But if you think about it from the perspective of visual culture, Islamic visual culture, it's easier to be able to relate.
About word art,
exactly.
Absolutely.
What at the end of the day, art is everything.
Islamic.
Yeah,
And
so just focusing on that visual culture aspect, I think, is important, especially when it's what we're seeing here at the Biennale.
Also, the building itself, right? The building that you're a custodian over, right, is clearly part of the
cultural heritage.
It's about the cultural heritage, right? And there is, and the contract is to protect that heritage, precisely. Before we wrap up, I'm curious if there's any other pieces or any other things that you've seen at the Biennale that have really left a impression with you, or like a lasting message.
A lot. I cannot choose, honestly. Like I said, there's a few aspects that I've seen within the contemporary art installations that are really inspiring.
Yeah.
And I think they speak very beautifully to the history of what we see in the gallery spaces and the continuity of that and how it might look like in the future. That's a nice thing.
And in our case, don't forget, we don't really identify ourselves as I mean, we are an Islamic institution, but we don't identify ourselves as an Islamic art or Islamic institution. On the other hand, we are totally, because of the Waqf aspect, because of the collection, because of the buildings, the people who are we have 3 tombs in our buildings, which are Khwarizmi warriors who were part of Salah ad-Din's army that liberated Jerusalem. So, I mean,
you couldn't have brought those. Come on.
Yeah, exactly. So. It's absolutely no, but I mean, the other thing I wanted to say, you didn't ask me the question, but I'll answer it. Was that in our case, for me it was, there are 4 manuscripts there. They might or might not be the rarest, the most valuable, whatever. And had we been able to bring a manuscript, an object, we would have brought one of them, right? And there would have been that and the plaque. But in fact, we got a much better deal, I think, in the sense that because we couldn't bring it, curatorially, they and us needed to express what they wanted to see in one manuscript through the way that we visually presented the history of the site and the people and the collection and how it was brought together in that sort of timeline set of photos. And we also wanted to contextualize it, which perhaps we were not able to, I think. Doesn't matter. It didn't need to be done at the Islamic Arts Biennale. But there are 2 photos which situate the library, which is a very important part of its story, both about why is it there, and what does it mean to be there today in today's Jerusalem. So, we're on the borderline, literally, in the old city between what is called the Jewish Quarter, the Buraq Wall Plaza, and the rest of the old city. And so that, 100 years ago, the significance of that was that it was the closest you could get to the Aqsa, because it was just, we're 200 meters from Bab Sidsin. Today, the significance of that site is that we're surrounded by Israeli settlers, and we have to, factor that in to our operations. So I mean, all I'm saying is that the most valuable object, we couldn't bring it, and it will probably not it's not necessarily one of the manuscripts.
Yeah. Well,
Tamam.
I have to say to both of you that there's a really special episode. It means a lot to us that Raja, you're here from Palestine, that Palestine is being represented in the podcast series and in AlMadar. Farah Ithra is a really important institution both in Saudi, in the region, and in the world. So it's really amazing.
And we got to know each other.
And you guys got to know
which is part of the idea of Madar. I understand. It's to bring us all together.
So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Cheers
so much.
Thank you so much.